The Broken Bell Saloon stank of whiskey, tobacco, and desperation. Mara Keene stood in the doorway, her worn boots planted on warped floorboards that groaned under decades of regret. Every eye in the room turned toward her, not with respect, not with sympathy, but with the cold calculation of men sizing up a commodity. She didn't flinch. Mrs. Keene. The voice belonged to Gerald Tompkins, the banker who'd been circling her property like a buzzard since Thomas died. He sat at the corner table, cards spread before him, a cigar dangling from his wet lips. Didn't expect to see you here. This is men's business. My debt makes it my business, Mara said. Her voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade through rotted cloth. The room went quiet. Someone coughed. A chair scraped. Tompkins leaned back, his belly straining against a vest that had seen better days. Your late husband's debt, you mean? God rest his soul. The words came out oily, performative. Nobody in this room gave a damn about Thomas Keene's soul. Same thing now, isn't it? Mara stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. The slap of wood against frame felt final. You've made that clear enough in your letters. There were 8 men at that table. She recognized most of them. Carl Messer, who owned the feed store and had refused her credit 2 weeks ago. Dutch Harold, whose ranch bordered hers and who'd been generously offering to buy her out at a fraction of what the land was worth. And sitting at the far end, quiet as a headstone, was Rowan Hale. He didn't look at her. Not at first. Rowan was a big man, broad-shouldered and weathered in a way that made it hard to guess his age. Could have been 35. Could have been 50. His hands rested flat on the table, scarred knuckles and dirt under the nails despite the obvious scrubbing. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his hat sat on the table beside a half-empty glass of something dark. Mrs. Keene, Tompkins said again, drawing out her name like he enjoyed the taste. If you're here to plead for more time, I'm not here to plead for anything. That got Rowan's attention. His eyes flicked up, dark, unreadable, and settled on her face. She met his gaze and held it. Then why are you here? Tompkins asked. He was grinning now, showing teeth yellowed by smoke and poor hygiene. Because unless you've got $1,500 in that dress, I don't see what... I heard you were discussing options. Mara's voice stayed level, steady. She'd practiced this on the walk over, rehearsing every word until her jaw ached. I thought I should be part of that conversation. Options. Tompkins chuckled. Well, that's a polite way to put it. Dutch Harold leaned forward, his chair creaking. No offense, ma'am, but there ain't much to discuss. You got land. You got water rights from the old Keene claim, and you got no way to work either one. Your husband couldn't make it pay when he was alive, and you sure as hell can't do it now. The other men nodded. A few muttered agreement. Mara's throat tightened, but she swallowed it down. Showing weakness here would be like bleeding in shark-infested water. My husband, she said carefully, made mistakes. I'm not here to defend him, but that land is mine now, and the water rights are legal, registered, and sealed. For now, Tompkins said, but when the bank forecloses, and it will, those rights transfer to whoever buys the property. That's how it works. Unless someone assumes the debt, Mara said. The room shifted. A few men exchanged glances. Tompkins' grin faded. Assumes the debt? You got someone in mind, Mrs. Keene? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her attention to Rowan Hale. He was still watching her, expression unreadable. The man hadn't said a single word since she walked in. I understand Mr. Hale has been looking for water access, Mara said. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Dutch Harold barked a laugh. That's one way to put it. Rowan's been landlocked since the drought hit. Lost 2 wells already. He needs that creek running through your property, or his herd's going to be dead by September. Then we have mutual interests, Mara said. Tompkins' eyes narrowed. What are you proposing? Mara took a breath. This was it. The moment where she either salvaged something from the wreckage of her life or drowned in it. Marriage, she said. The word hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Someone laughed, a short, ugly sound. Then another man joined in. Within seconds, half the table was chuckling, shaking their heads. Marriage, Tompkins repeated, his grin returning. To who exactly? Mara looked directly at Rowan. To Mr. Hale. The laughter stopped. Rowan didn't move, didn't blink. His expression could have been carved from granite. Now wait just a damn minute, Dutch started. Think about it, Mara cut him off. Rowan gets legal access to the water. I get the debt cleared and a roof that doesn't leak. It's practical. Practical. Tompkins shook his head slowly. Mrs. Keene, with all due respect, this is business, Mara finished. Same as everything else in this room. Rowan finally spoke. His voice was low, rough, like gravel scraping metal. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking, Mara said. A legal arrangement, nothing more. A legal arrangement. Rowan's mouth twisted, not quite a smile. You make it sound simple. It is simple. You need water. I need stability. We both need the vultures to stop circling. Dutch Harold slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. Rowan, you can't seriously be considering— Shut up, Dutch! Rowan's voice didn't rise, but the command in it was absolute. Dutch's mouth snapped shut. Rowan stood slowly, pushing his chair back. He was taller than Mara had expected, at least 6'2", maybe more. He picked up his hat and turned it over in his hands, studying it like it held answers. You got conditions? He asked. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. I keep my independence. I work if I choose to work, rest if I need to rest. I'm not a servant. Never said you were. And I want my own space, my own room. Something flickered across Rowan's face. Surprise, maybe, or relief. That can be arranged? And respect, Mara added. I won't be treated like property. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Anything else? That's it. Then I got one condition of my own. Mara waited. You don't run, Rowan said. You commit to this, you see it through. I don't care if it gets hard. I don't care if you hate every minute of it. You stay until we both agree it's done. No running off in the night because you changed your mind. The weight of what he was asking settled over her. This wasn't a business arrangement to him, not entirely. There was something else there, something darker. I don't run, Mara said. Rowan studied her face, searching for cracks. Whatever he saw, or didn't see, seemed to satisfy him. All right then. He extended his hand. Mara hesitated for half a second, then took it. His grip was firm, calloused, and warm despite the coldness in his eyes. Tompkins sputtered. Now hold on. This is highly irregular. Irregular or not, it solves your problem, Rowan said without looking at him. I'll cover her debt. All of it. You'll have your money by end of week. But the land stays with her. Marriage makes it joint property, but the water rights transfer to me through legal access. You want to argue about it? We can get lawyers involved. Or you can take your money and be done with it. Tompkins' face went red, but he didn't argue further. He knew when he was beaten. Mara pulled her hand back, her palm still tingling from the contact. Around them, the other men were muttering, some angry, some shocked, some just confused. We'll need a preacher, Mara said. There's one in town, Rowan replied. We'll go tomorrow. Tomorrow? No point waiting. Sooner it's done. Sooner I can get my cattle watered. He said it so matter-of-factly, like they were discussing a fence repair instead of a marriage. Mara almost laughed. Almost. Tomorrow then? She agreed. Rowan put his hat on, tipped it slightly in her direction, the barest acknowledgement of courtesy, and walked out. The door swung shut behind him with another decisive slap. The remaining men stared at Mara like she'd grown a second head. You just made a deal with the devil, Dutch Harold said quietly. Mara turned to face him. Better than being devoured by you. She walked out before anyone could respond. Heat. The night air hit her like cold water. Mara stood on the saloon's porch, gripping the railing while her hands shook. Now that it was done, now that she was alone, the weight of what she'd just agreed to crashed down on her. Marriage. To a stranger. A hard, silent man who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. But what choice did she have? Thomas had left her with nothing but debt and a piece of land she couldn't work alone. The creditors were circling, the town had written her off as a tragic case, and every door she'd knocked on had closed in her face. This was survival, pure and simple. She thought of her mother's voice, brittle and disappointed. "You always were too stubborn for your own good, Mara." Maybe. But stubbornness had kept her alive this long. She straightened her spine, released the railing, and started walking. The streets of Crestfall were quiet this time of night, just the occasional lantern glow from a window or the distant sound of someone's dog barking. The town wasn't much, a main street, a handful of shops, a church that saw more use for funerals than weddings. Mara's rented room was above the general store, a cramped space with a leaking roof and walls so thin she could hear the couple next door arguing most nights. She'd been there since Thomas died, unable to stay in the house they'd shared, unable to afford anything better. Tomorrow, that would change. Tomorrow, she'd become Mrs. Rowan Hale. The thought made her stomach twist. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, her boots heavy on each step. Inside, she lit the single oil lamp and sat on the edge of the sagging bed. Her few possessions were already packed: a trunk with clothes, a few books Thomas had given her early in their marriage, a photograph of her parents in a cracked frame. Not much to show for 32 years of life. She pulled the photograph out, studying her parents' stern faces. Her father had been a railroad man, her mother a schoolteacher. They'd had hopes for Mara: education, a respectable marriage, stability. Then she'd met Thomas Keene, charming and reckless, and those hopes had crumbled. "I'm doing what I have to," she whispered to the photograph. "You'd understand that." Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter now. She set the photograph back in the trunk and lay down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion had a way of winning. And eventually, her eyes closed. Morning came too fast. Mara woke to sunlight cutting through the threadbare curtains and the sound of wagons rattling past below. She washed her face in the basin, changed into her only decent dress, a dark green cotton that had seen better days but was clean and mended, and pinned her hair up carefully. Her reflection in the small mirror looked pale, dark circles under her eyes. But there was a hardness there, too. A determination. She was ready. The knock came at 8 o'clock sharp. Mara opened the door to find Rowan standing in the hallway, hat in hand. He'd cleaned up, shaved, changed into what might have been his only good shirt, dark trousers without visible patches. "Morning," he said. "Morning." An awkward silence stretched between them. "You ready?" Rowan asked finally. "As I'll ever be." He nodded and stepped back, letting her pass. They descended the stairs in silence, Rowan carrying her trunk like it weighed nothing. Outside, a wagon waited, hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He loaded the trunk into the back, then offered his hand to help her up. Mara took it briefly, settling onto the bench seat. Rowan climbed up beside her, took the reins, and started the horses moving. The ride through town was excruciating. People stared, women whispering behind their hands, men stopping mid-conversation to watch them pass. Mara kept her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. The church sat at the edge of town, a small wooden structure with a crooked cross on top. Reverend Michaels was waiting outside, an older man with kind eyes and too much patience for this town's sins. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Keene," he greeted them with a nod. "I understand you're here for a marriage ceremony." "That's right," Rowan said. "Under rather unusual circumstances, I hear." "Circumstances don't change the legality," Rowan replied. Reverend Michaels studied them both for a long moment. "Marriage is more than a legal contract, son. It's a covenant, a partnership. With respect, Reverend, we know what we're doing," Mara said. "We'd appreciate it if you'd perform the ceremony." The Reverend sighed. "Very well, come inside." The church was cool and dim, dust motes floating in shafts of light from the high windows. There were no guests, no flowers, no music. Just the 3 of them standing before the altar. "Do you have rings?" the Reverend asked. Rowan pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band worn and scratched. "This was my mother's." He didn't offer an explanation, and Mara didn't ask. She held out her left hand and he slid the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but it stayed on. The ceremony was brief, mechanical. The Reverend spoke the familiar words, asked the familiar questions. Mara heard herself say, "I do," like it was someone else's voice. Rowan's response was equally flat. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The Reverend closed his Bible. "You may kiss the bride." Rowan looked at Mara. She looked back. Neither of them moved. "Or not," the Reverend added quietly. Rowan nodded once, a kind of acknowledgement, then turned to sign the marriage certificate. Mara did the same, her hand surprisingly steady as she wrote her new name, Mara Hale. It looked foreign, wrong, but it was done. The ride to Rowan's ranch took 3 hours, the terrain growing rougher as they left town behind. The land here was hard, rocky soil, sparse vegetation, mountains rising in the distance like broken teeth. They passed abandoned homesteads, wells that had run dry, fields gone to dust. Rowan didn't speak. Mara didn't push. She studied the landscape instead, trying to imagine what it might have looked like before the drought, trying to imagine herself living here. Finally, they crested a rise, and the ranch came into view. It was bigger than she'd expected, a main house, a barn, several outbuildings, corrals with a few dozen cattle visible in the distance. But everything looked worn, neglected. Fences sagged, paint peeled from the house, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "This is it," he said. Mara climbed down without waiting for help. The house was 2 stories, built from rough-cut lumber that had weathered to gray. The porch steps creaked under her weight, and the front door stuck when Rowan pushed it open. Inside was worse. Dust covered every surface. The furniture was minimal and functional. A table, a few chairs, a cold stove. The air smelled stale, like the house had been holding its breath for years. "I'll show you your room," Rowan said. He led her upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. A bed with a bare mattress, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a single window overlooking the empty yard. "It's yours," Rowan said. "I'm at the other end of the hall. You won't be bothered." Mara set her traveling bag on the bed. "Thank you." Rowan lingered in the doorway like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "I got work to do," he said finally. "There's food in the cellar if you're hungry. Water pumps out back." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs. Mara stood alone in the empty room and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The first week was a study in silence. Rowan left before dawn and returned after dark, smelling of sweat and dirt and animals. He ate dinner in silence, whatever Mara managed to pull together from the meager supplies, then disappeared to his room. Some nights, she heard him pacing. Others, nothing. Mara spent those days exploring the house, taking inventory of what needed fixing. Everything, it turned out. The stove barely worked, the roof leaked in 2 places, the floors were warped, and half the windows didn't close properly. She started small, swept the floors, scrubbed the table, aired out the rooms. It wasn't much, but it was something. On the 3rd day, she ventured outside. The barn was in worse shape than the house. Tools rusted and scattered, tack falling apart, the whole structure leaning slightly to one side like a drunk. But there were chickens, scraggly, half-wild things that scattered when she approached. And there was a garden plot, completely overgrown. Mara spent the afternoon pulling weeds, her hands blistering, her back aching. By sunset, she'd cleared maybe a quarter of it. Progress. When Rowan came in that night, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the clean kitchen. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." He stood there a moment longer, then nodded and sat down to eat. They ate in silence as always. But the next morning, Mara found a pair of work gloves on the kitchen table, used but serviceable. She picked them up, studying the worn leather. A small thing, but it felt like acknowledgement. 2 weeks in, the silence broke. Mara was outside trying to repair a section of fence when she heard raised voices from the barn. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. Two men stood near the corral, Rowan and someone she didn't recognize. The stranger was gesturing angrily, his voice carrying across the yard even if the words didn't. Rowan's posture was rigid, defensive. Mara set down the hammer and walked closer, careful to stay out of sight. She didn't want to intrude, but something about the tension in the air made her uneasy. "Can't keep pretending this is sustainable," the stranger was saying. "You're burning through what little cash you got left, and for what? A herd that's half the size it should be? Land you can't even water properly?" "I'm managing," Rowan said. "Managing? Jesus, Rowan, look around. This place is falling apart." "You're falling apart." "I said I'm managing." The stranger, younger, maybe mid-20s, with Rowan's same dark hair and sharp features, shook his head. "You've been saying that for 3 years, ever since—" "Don't." "She died. I know it hurts, but I said don't." Rowan's voice went cold, final. The younger man backed off, hands raised. All right. But this marriage thing, Rowan, you can't seriously think—" "It's done, Cole. Drop it." "Gis." Cole, the name clicked. Rowan's brother. Mara had heard mentions of him in town but had never met him. "Done or not, it's insane," Cole said. "You married a stranger so you could water your cattle. That's practical. It's desperate. Maybe, but it's my choice." Cole was quiet for a moment, then quieter. "Does she know about Elaine?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "No, and she doesn't need to." "She's living in Elaine's house, Rowan. She's going to figure it out eventually." "That's my problem, not yours." Cole sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just trying to help." "I don't need help. I need you to trust me." The brothers stared at each other. Finally, Cole nodded. "Fine. But if this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you." He walked away, passing within 10 feet of where Mara stood hidden behind the barn. She held her breath until he was gone, then waited another full minute before moving. When she finally stepped into view, Rowan was still standing by the corral, staring at nothing. "How much did you hear?" he asked, without turning around. Mara's stomach dropped. "Enough." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You got questions? Ask them now." Mara hesitated. There were 100 questions. Who was Elaine? How did she die? Why did Rowan look like a man haunted every time someone mentioned her? But she asked the only one that mattered. "Does it change anything between us?" Rowan considered that. "No." "Then I don't need to know." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but close. "All right." He walked past her toward the house, and Mara let him go. But as she stood there in the fading light, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into the middle of a story that started long before she arrived, and she had no idea how it was supposed to end. The name Elaine hung in the air between them for days after Cole's visit, unspoken but present, like smoke that wouldn't clear. Mara didn't ask about it again. She'd meant what she said. It didn't change the arrangement between them. But that didn't stop her from noticing things. The way Rowan avoided the parlor at the front of the house, keeping to the kitchen and his bedroom like the rest of the place didn't exist. The trunk in the hallway upstairs that he never opened but also never moved. The faint outline on the wall in the main bedroom where a picture frame had once hung. The wood underneath darker, protected from years of sun that had faded everything around it. Mara didn't go into that room. It was Rowan's space, and she respected that. But sometimes, passing by, she'd catch herself looking at that closed door and wondering what was on the other side. The third week brought a shift in the weather. The air turned hotter, drier, the kind of heat that made breathing feel like work. Mara woke before dawn to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, restless and agitated. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Rowan already in the kitchen, gulping down cold coffee. "Something wrong?" she asked. He set the cup down hard. "Creek's running low, lower than it should be this time of year." Mara's stomach tightened. The creek, her creek technically, the one that had made this whole arrangement possible, was their lifeline. If it dried up? How low? Low enough to worry about. Rowan grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "I'm riding out to check the upper source. Might be debris blocking it. Might be something worse. I'll come with you." He stopped, hand on the doorknob. "No need." I said I'll come. Rowan turned to look at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. You ever ridden a horse? He asked. Not recently. That means no. He studied her for a moment, then sighed. All right, but you'll ride double with me. I'm not wasting time saddling another horse. 20 minutes later, Mara found herself seated behind Rowan on a big gray gelding, her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist, trying not to think about how close they were or how warm he felt despite the early morning chill. The horse moved with a steady, ground-eating walk, following a narrow trail that led away from the ranch and up into the rocky hills. They rode in silence for the first mile. Mara focused on not falling off, on the rhythm of the horse's movement, on the landscape passing by, scrub brush and scattered pine trees, rocks that looked like they'd been dropped by angry giants. You don't have to prove anything, Rowan said finally. Mara shifted her grip slightly. I'm not trying to prove anything. Then why come? Because this affects both of us. If the water dries up, we're both in trouble. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Fair enough. They continued climbing, the trail growing steeper and rockier. The sun climbed with them, turning the sky from gray to pale blue to the hard, bright color of heated metal. By the time they reached the source of the creek, a spring that bubbled up from between two massive boulders, Mara's shirt was stuck to her back with sweat. Rowan dismounted and helped her down, his hands on her waist brief and impersonal. Then he was moving toward the spring, kneeling beside it, running his hands through the water. It's flowing, he said, but weak. Mara moved closer. The spring formed a small pool before spilling over rocks and starting its journey downhill. The water was clear and cold, but Rowan was right. The flow was thin, barely more than a trickle in places. Could be the aquifers dropping, Rowan muttered, more to himself than to her. Drought's been going on long enough. It's possible the underground reserves are running low. Can we do anything about it? Not if it's the aquifer. That's beyond fixing. He stood, wiping his wet hands on his trousers. Best we can do is conserve what we've got. Reduce the herd, maybe. Use less water for irrigation. Mara looked at the thin stream of water and felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just Rowan's problem. It was hers now, too. Their survival was tied to this fragile flow of water, and there wasn't a damn thing either of them could do to make it stronger. How bad could it get? She asked. Rowan's jaw worked. Bad enough that we might lose everything. The words hung between them, stark and honest. Mara appreciated that he didn't try to soften it or offer false reassurance. They were past that. Then we'll figure it out, she said. Rowan looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd complain more. Someone who'd want out the minute things got hard. Mara met his gaze. I told you I don't run. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he kept so carefully maintained. Yeah, you did. They stood there for a moment, the only sound the weak babbling of the spring and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Then Rowan turned away, breaking the moment. We should head back, long ride down. The return journey was slower, the midday heat bearing down on them like a physical weight. Mara felt herself starting to drift, exhaustion pulling at her despite the jarring rhythm of the horse. Once she nearly slid sideways and Rowan's hand shot back to steady her. You all right? He asked. Fine, just tired. We'll stop at the overlook. There's shade. 10 minutes later, they stopped beneath a cluster of scrub oaks that offered minimal relief from the sun. Rowan helped her down again, and Mara collapsed onto a flat rock, her legs shaking. You're not used to riding, Rowan observed. I'll manage. He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and handed it to her. The water was warm but wet, and Mara drank gratefully before passing it back. Rowan took a long drink, then splashed some water over his face and neck. You should have stayed at the house, he said. Probably. But you didn't. No. Rowan sat down on a nearby rock, removing his hat and running a hand through sweat-damp hair. Why? Mara looked at him, really looked at him, for maybe the first time since they'd met. He was tired. Not just physically, but in a deeper way. like exhaustion had settled into his bones years ago and never left. There were lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with loss. "Because I'm tired of being useless," she said. "Thomas never let me help with anything, said it wasn't a woman's place. I spent 8 years watching him fail and not being allowed to do a damn thing about it. I won't do that again." Rowan studied her, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing past all her defenses to something raw and vulnerable underneath. "You're not useless," he said finally. It was the kindest thing he'd said to her since they met. "Thanks," Mara said quietly. They rested for another 10 minutes before mounting up again. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer, the heat relentless, but Mara gritted her teeth and endured it. By the time they arrived, her entire body ached, and she was fairly certain she'd never be able to walk properly again. Rowan helped her down one last time, and Mara's legs immediately buckled. He caught her, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Easy. I'm fine. You're stubborn. You say that like it's a bad thing." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Go rest. I'll take care of the horse." Mara limped into the house and collapsed onto the ancient sofa in the front room. The parlor Rowan avoided. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but exhaustion won, and when she woke, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. From somewhere outside came the sound of hammering. Mara dragged herself to the window and looked out to see Rowan working on the fence she'd abandoned days ago, repairing the broken section with practiced efficiency. He could have left it, could have told her it was her job since she'd started it, but he hadn't. Mara went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner with what little they had: beans, dried meat, some of the vegetables she'd managed to salvage, from the garden. It wasn't much, but it was something. When Rowan came in an hour later, covered in dust and sweat, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the table. "You didn't have to cook. You didn't have to fix the fence." He almost smiled at that. Almost. They ate together in their usual silence, but it felt different now, less hostile. More like two people who were starting to figure out how to exist in the same space without constantly bristling. After dinner, Rowan lingered at the table instead of immediately disappearing to his room. "The fence looks good," Mara said. "It'll hold for now." "Thank you." He nodded, turning his cup in his hands. "About the water situation. We'll conserve, like you said. It might not be enough." Mara met his eyes. "Then we'll figure out something else." Rowan looked at her for a long moment and she couldn't read his expression. Then he stood, pushing his chair back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be harder." He wasn't wrong. The next morning, Rowan woke her before dawn with a knock on her door. "If you're serious about helping, I need you in the barn. Now." Mara dressed quickly and found him already working, sorting through equipment and supplies. The ranch hands were there too, 3 men she'd seen from a distance but never spoken to. They stopped talking when she entered, eyeing her with open skepticism. "This is Mara," Rowan said without preamble. "She'll be helping out from now on." The oldest of the 3, a grizzled man with a face like weathered leather, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "No offense, ma'am, but this ain't women's work." "Then it's a good thing I'm not asking for your opinion, Frank," Rowan said. His tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. "She works, same as the rest of us." Frank looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rowan's expression made him think better of it. He nodded once and went back to his work. The other 2 men introduced themselves: Miguel, younger and friendlier, and Jack, who barely looked old enough to shave. They were polite enough, if wary. "What do you need me to do?" Mara asked. Rowan handed her a shovel. "We're digging a new irrigation channel, trying to maximize what water we've got. You'll work with Miguel." The next 8 hours were brutal. Mara had thought she knew what hard work was, but this redefined it. Digging through rocky soil in the blazing heat, her hands blistering despite the gloves Rowan had given her, her back screaming in protest. Miguel worked beside her, mercifully not trying to make conversation, just keeping a steady rhythm that she struggled to match. By midday, she was ready to collapse. Her hands were bleeding through the gloves, and she was fairly certain she was going to pass out. "Water break?" Miguel called out, straightening and pulling a canteen from his belt. Mara dropped the shovel and bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. The world spun slightly. "You all right, Mrs. Hale?" Miguel asked. "Fine." "You don't look fine." "I said I'm fine." Miguel wisely didn't push. He handed her the canteen and Mara drank deeply, the water doing little to ease the exhaustion pulling at her. Rowan appeared from around the corner of the barn, surveying their progress. His eyes landed on Mara, and his expression hardened. "You're done," he said. "I'm not done." "Look at your hands." Mara looked down. The gloves were soaked with blood. "It's fine." "It's not fine. Go clean yourself up." "I can keep working." "I said you're done." Rowan's voice went flat, final. "Don't make me repeat myself." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could push through, but the look on his face told her it would be pointless. She handed the canteen back to Miguel and walked toward the house, her pride stinging worse than her hands. Inside, she peeled off the gloves and stared at her palms. The blisters had burst, leaving raw, bleeding skin. She cleaned them as best she could with water from the pump, biting down hard to keep from crying out. She was wrapping her hands in strips of clean cloth when Rowan came in. "Let me see." "I've got it." "Let me see, Mika," he repeated, and there was something in his voice that made her stop and hold out her hands. He took them carefully, examining the damage with a critical eye. Then he went to a cabinet and pulled out a tin of something that smelled sharp and medicinal. "This'll hurt," he warned. "Everything hurts." He almost smiled at that. Then he started applying the salve, his touch surprisingly gentle despite his rough hands. Mara hissed at the sting, but didn't pull away. "You shouldn't have pushed yourself so hard," Rowan said quietly. "I was keeping up. Barely." He finished with one hand and started on the other. "Miguel's been doing this kind of work for 20 years. You've been doing it for one day. So I should just give up." "I didn't say that." He wrapped her hands in fresh bandages, his movements practiced. "I'm saying know your limits. There's no shame in stopping before you destroy yourself." Mara looked at him, at the concentration on his face as he tied off the bandages. "Did you learn that the hard way?" His hands stilled for just a moment. "Yeah." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. When he finished, he stepped back, and the space between them felt charged somehow, different than before. "Rest tomorrow," he said. "Let those heal." "I'll rest when—" "That wasn't a suggestion." Mara sighed. "Fine." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You did well today, better than I expected." The compliment caught her off guard. By the time she thought of a response, he was already gone. That night, Mara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her hands throbbing despite the salve. She could hear Rowan moving around downstairs, the familiar sound of him checking locks and banking the stove. Routine sounds, domestic sounds. When had that happened? When had this started feeling less like enemy territory and more like something else? She didn't have an answer. The next day, true to her word, she rested. But resting didn't mean sitting idle. She spent the morning organizing the kitchen properly, going through the meager supplies and making notes of what they needed. Then she tackled the parlor, the room Rowan avoided. It was full of dust and neglect, but underneath that it was clear someone had once cared about this space. The furniture was good quality, if old. There were built-in bookshelves, mostly empty now, a fireplace with a mantel that might have held photographs or keepsakes. Mara worked slowly, her bandaged hands limiting what she could do, but by afternoon the room looked almost livable. She found a box of books tucked in a corner and started shelving them, trying not to read too much into the titles. Poetry, natural history, a few novels. She was shelving the last one when she noticed something tucked between two books, a small leather journal. She pulled it out carefully, and a photograph slipped free, falling to the floor. Mara picked it up. It was a woman, young, maybe 25, with dark hair and a bright smile. She stood in front of this very house, wearing a simple dress, one hand shading her eyes from the sun. Elaine. It had to be. Mara stared at the photograph, at the happiness in the woman's face, and felt something twist in her chest. This was who Rowan had lost. This was who Mara was replacing, even if only in the most practical sense. She shouldn't have looked. She knew that. But she opened the journal anyway. The handwriting was neat, precise. The entries were dated starting 3 years ago. April 12th. Rowan surprised me with wildflowers today. Said he saw them on his way back from checking the fence line and thought of me. Such a small thing, but it made my whole day bright. Mara closed the journal quickly, her heart hammering. This was private. This was grief she had no right to touch. She put the journal back where she'd found it, tucked the photograph inside, and stepped away from the shelf. Her hands were shaking. "What are you doing?" She spun around to find Rowan standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I was cleaning," Mara said. "I didn't mean to." "You were in her things." "I found a journal. I didn't know what it was until—" "Get out!" The words were quiet, but they hit like a slap. "Rowan, I said get out." Mara fled the room, her face burning. She went upstairs and shut herself in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. She'd crossed a line, she knew it, and now whatever fragile understanding they'd been building was shattered. An hour passed, then another. Mara heard Rowan moving around downstairs, heard the front door slam. When she finally worked up the courage to go down, the house was empty. He didn't come back until after dark. Mara heard him in the kitchen, heard the scrape of a chair. She waited upstairs, uncertain whether to go down or stay hidden. Finally, she forced herself to descend the stairs. Rowan sat at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in front of him. He looked up when she entered, but didn't speak. "I'm sorry," Mara said. "I shouldn't have looked." He was quiet for a long moment. "No, you shouldn't have. It won't happen again." "I know." He took a drink, set the glass down carefully. "She died 3 years ago. Fever. Came on fast, took her in less than a week. The doctors couldn't do anything." Mara stood frozen, not knowing what to say. "This was her house," Rowan continued, his voice flat. "Her home. She made it that way. And when she died, I couldn't keep it up. Couldn't stand to be in those rooms, seeing her everywhere. I understand. Do you?" He looked at her, and there was pain in his eyes so raw it was hard to witness. "Do you understand what it's like to watch someone you love slip away and not be able to do a damn thing about it?" Mara thought of Thomas, of the slow dissolution of their marriage, of watching him drink himself into debt and despair. It wasn't the same, but— "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." Rowan studied her face, searching for truth. Whatever he found there made him nod slowly. "I'm not asking you to replace her," he said. "I know that's not what this is. I know. But I need you to respect that some places in this house are still hers. The parlor, my bedroom. I'm not ready to let go of those yet. I understand. I'll stay out of them." He nodded, took another drink. "All right then." Mara hesitated, then moved to sit across from him. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "She would have liked you," Rowan said finally. Mara looked up, surprised. "Elaine, she would have liked your stubbornness, your determination." He almost smiled. "She was like that too. Drove me crazy sometimes." "She sounds like she was remarkable." She was. He finished his drink and stood. "I'm going to bed. Tomorrow we need to move the herd closer to the creek. I'll need your help." "My hands." "Will be fine for riding. Not digging, but riding." He paused at the doorway. "Good night, Mara." It was the first time he'd used her name since the wedding. "Good night, Rowan." He left, and Mara sat alone in the kitchen, feeling like something fundamental had shifted between them. They'd both shown wounds tonight, his old and deep, hers fresher, but no less real. Maybe that was what it took to build something honest. Not perfection, but truth. The next morning came too early, but Mara forced herself up and out to the barn where Rowan was already saddling horses. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept, but his movements were efficient and practiced. "You'll ride the mare," he said, indicating a smaller horse, brown with a white blaze. "She's gentle, won't give you trouble." Mara approached the mare carefully, running a hand along her neck. The horse turned to look at her with dark, intelligent eyes. "What's her name?" "Doesn't have one." Never saw the point. Can I name her? Rowan shrugged. She's a horse, not a pet. I'll call her Copper. Suit yourself. Whoa. He helped her into the saddle, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. His hands on her ankle were professional, impersonal, but Mara was acutely aware of every touch. They rode out together, Rowan leading the way on his gray gelding. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. In the distance, Mara could see the herd, maybe 60 head of cattle, scattered across the dry pasture. We're going to move them to the lower pasture, closer to the creek, Rowan explained. It'll be easier to water them there, and the grass is slightly better. Frank and Miguel are coming from the other direction to help push them. What do you need me to do? Stay on the left flank. Keep them moving toward the creek. They'll try to scatter. Don't let them. Use your voice, use the horse. Cattle are stupid, but they'll move if you're persistent enough. It sounded simple. It wasn't. The herd didn't want to move. They were settled in their spots, chewing cud, completely uninterested in relocating. When Rowan and the hands started pushing them, they scattered in every direction except the one they were supposed to go. Mara found herself chasing after a stubborn cow that had decided to go the complete opposite direction, yelling until her voice went hoarse, Copper dancing beneath her as the cow dodged and weaved. "Come on, you stubborn! Move!" Mara shouted. The cow ignored her. She heard laughter and looked over to see Miguel grinning at her. "Talk sweeter, Mrs. Hale. She thinks you're being rude." "I'll show her rude, Mara," Mara muttered, but she tried a different approach, making clicking sounds and using Copper to gently herd the cow back toward the group. It worked. Slowly, grudgingly, the cow rejoined the herd. "Better," Rowan called out. The praise warmed her more than it should have. They worked for 3 hours in the blazing sun, slowly moving the herd toward the lower pasture. By the time they got them settled near the creek, Mara was exhausted, sunburned, and covered in dust. But the cattle were watered, the immediate crisis averted. Rowan rode up beside her, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead. "You did good." "I mostly chased one cow in circles. You kept at it. That's what matters." They watched the cattle drink, the sound of their lapping strangely peaceful after the chaos of the morning. "Is this enough?" Mara asked. "The water?" "For now. We'll see how long it lasts." It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. That seemed to be Rowan's way. Never sugarcoating, never offering false hope. Just truth, stark and unadorned. "We should head back," Rowan said. "Get some food in you before you fall off that horse." Mara realized she was swaying slightly in the saddle, exhaustion pulling at her. Good idea. They rode back slowly, the horses tired, the midday heat oppressive. When they reached the ranch, Mara practically fell off Copper, her legs barely holding her weight. Rowan steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy." "I'm fine. You keep saying that, because it's true." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You're relentless, you know that? So I've been told." This time he actually smiled, a real smile, not just a ghost of one. It transformed his face completely, making him look younger, less burdened. Mara felt her breath catch. Then the moment passed, and Rowan was moving away, leading the horses toward the barn. "Go wash up. I'll handle the horses." Mara did as she was told, washing away the worst of the dust and changing into clean clothes. When she came back down, she found Rowan in the kitchen, assembling something that might generously be called lunch. Bread, hard cheese, some dried apples. They ate together, too tired for conversation. But the silence between them had changed again. It wasn't hostile or awkward. It was the silence of two people who'd worked together toward a common goal and survived it. "Tomorrow, we should check the north fence line," Rowan said eventually. "Some of the posts looked loose when I rode past them last week." "I'll come with you." He didn't argue this time, just nodded. After lunch, Mara found herself drawn back to the garden plot she'd started clearing weeks ago. Her hands were healing but still tender, so she worked carefully, using a hoe instead of pulling weeds by hand. The soil was terrible, dry, depleted, full of rocks. But underneath all that, she could see potential. With water, with care, something might grow here. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice Rowan approaching until he spoke. "You really think you can get anything to grow in that?" Mara straightened, shading her eyes to look at him. I can try. Waste of effort, probably. This land's too dry. Maybe. But I'm going to try anyway. Rowan studied the plot. Then her. You need seeds, tools, better soil. I know. I'll see what I can spare. Mara's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to gratitude. Thank you. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the thanks. Don't thank me yet. Might all die anyway. Still worth trying. You're a strange woman, Mara Hale. She smiled. So I've been told. He walked away and Mara went back to her work, feeling something like hope taking root alongside the stubborn weeds she was pulling. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Mara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window to see two riders, a man and a woman, dismounting near the porch. Rowan came out of the barn, his posture immediately tense. Cole, he said. Didn't expect you back so soon. Got worried, Cole replied. Then he gestured to the woman beside him. This is Sarah. Well, we're engaged. The woman was pretty, blonde, with an open, friendly face. She smiled at Rowan. I've heard a lot about you. Bet you have. Rowan's tone was dry. Then his eyes shifted to the house, and Mara realized he was looking for her. She took a breath and stepped out onto the porch. Sarah's eyes widened. Oh, you must be Mara. Cole told me about the wedding. Congratulations. Her enthusiasm felt genuine, which somehow made it worse. Mara forced a smile. Thank you. We brought some supplies, Cole said, indicating the packs on his horse. Figured you could use them. Rowan's jaw tightened. We're managing fine. I'm sure you are. But there's no harm in accepting help, is there? The brothers stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Rowan sighed. Fine. Bring them in. The next hour was awkward. Sarah tried her best to be friendly, asking Mara about the house, about the ranch, about how she was settling in. Mara answered carefully, aware of Rowan and Cole's strained conversation happening in low voices across the room. Not sustainable, was Cole was saying. You're burning through everything you've got left. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, then stop standing there. Sarah winced and caught Mara's eye. They've always been like this. Cole worries, Rowan pushes back. It's their way. Must be exhausting, Mara said. You have no idea. Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. But they love each other. They just have a hard time showing it. Mara glanced at Rowan, at the rigid set of his shoulders, the defensive posture. She could believe that. Eventually, Cole and Sarah left with promises to visit again soon. Rowan stood on the porch watching them ride away, his expression unreadable. He means well, Mara said quietly. I know. He's worried about you. I know that too. Rowan turned to face her. Doesn't mean he's right. Doesn't mean he's wrong either. Rowan's eyes narrowed. You taking his side now? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm just saying maybe he has a point. About what? About this not being sustainable. About you pushing too hard. Rowan's expression went cold. I've been running this ranch for 15 years. I think I know what I'm doing. I'm sure you do, but that doesn't mean you can't use help. I have help. I have the hands. I meant from Cole. From family. Cole has his own life now, his own plans. He doesn't need to be dragged down by my problems. He doesn't seem to see it that way. Rowan was quiet for a moment, jaw working. This conversation is over. He walked past her into the house, and Mara stood alone on the porch, frustrated and tired. They were making progress. She felt it. But Rowan's walls were built deep and strong, reinforced by grief and stubbornness. Every time she thought she was getting through, he'd pull back. The question was, did she have the patience to keep trying? Or would they both break before they ever truly connected? The answer came 2 weeks later, delivered not in words but in smoke. Mara woke to the smell of it, acrid, wrong, cutting through the morning air like a blade. She sat up in bed, disoriented, trying to place the scent. Then she heard shouting from outside, and her heart dropped. She threw on clothes and ran downstairs, bursting out the front door to find chaos. The eastern sky was dark with smoke, thick columns rising from somewhere beyond the ridge. Rowan stood in the yard with Frank and Miguel, all three staring at the horizon. "How bad?" Rowan was asking. "Bad," Frank said grimly. "Wind's pushing it this way. Could be on us by nightfall if it doesn't turn." Mara's stomach clenched. Fire. The one thing ranchers feared more than drought, more than disease, more than anything. Fire could take everything in hours, land, livestock, lives. "What do we do?" she asked. All three men turned to look at her. Rowan's face was set in hard lines, his eyes already calculating. "We prepare," he said. "Frank, ride to the Herald place, tell Dutch what's coming. Miguel, start moving the herd toward the creek. We'll need them as close to water as possible. Jack—" He looked around. "Where the hell is Jack?" "Still sleeping, probably," Miguel said. "Wake him. I need everyone working." Rowan turned to Mara. "You're coming with me." "Where?" "To set a fire break. If that fire reaches our property, we need something to slow it down." 20 minutes later, Mara found herself on horseback again, riding hard toward the eastern boundary of the ranch. Rowan pushed his gelding at a punishing pace, and Copper struggled to keep up. By the time they reached the fence line, both horses were lathered with sweat. Rowan dismounted and started pulling tools from his saddlebag. Shovels, axes, a strange implement Mara didn't recognize. "What is that? Wait," she asked. "Fire rake, used for clearing brush." He handed her a shovel. "We're going to dig a trench and clear everything combustible on this side of it. The wider we can make it, the better chance we have of stopping the fire from jumping." Mara looked at the endless stretch of dry grass and scrub brush, at the tools in her hands, at the smoke growing thicker on the horizon. This was impossible. Two people couldn't clear enough ground to make a difference. But Rowan was already working, attacking the earth with methodical fury, and Mara realized he wasn't thinking about what was impossible. He was thinking about what had to be done. She started digging. They worked for 3 hours straight, the sun climbing higher, the heat becoming unbearable. The smoke grew thicker, and occasionally Mara could see orange flickering in the distance. The fire was closer than she'd thought, much closer. Her hands, barely healed from the irrigation work, split open again, blood mixed with dirt as she dug, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Rowan worked beside her like a machine, his shirt soaked through, his face streaked with sweat and ash. "How much more?" Mara gasped. "Not enough," Rowan said. "Never enough." But he kept digging, so she did too. Miguel appeared around noon, riding fast. "Boss, the fire jumped the northern ridge. It's moving faster than we thought." Rowan straightened, chest heaving. "How long?" 3 hours, maybe 4 if we're lucky." "The herd?" "Moved. They're safe for now, but if the wind shifts—" "I know." Rowan wiped his face, leaving a smear of dirt. "Get back to the ranch. Start wetting down the buildings. Soak everything you can, and fill every bucket, trough, and barrel we've got." Miguel nodded and rode off. Mara looked at the fire break they'd created. It was maybe 50 yards long, 3 feet wide in most places, nowhere near enough to protect the entire ranch. "This won't stop it," she said. "No, but it might slow it down." Rowan picked up his shovel again. "Come on, every foot matters." They worked until Mara's vision started to blur, until her arms felt like dead weight, until she couldn't remember what it felt like to not be digging. The smoke was thick now, making it hard to breathe. She could hear the fire, a distant roar like some massive beast approaching. "Rowan," she said, "we need to go back." "Not yet." "Rowan, I said not yet." She stopped digging and looked at him, really looked at him. His face was a mask of desperation and determination, and she understood suddenly what was happening. This wasn't about the firebreak. This was about control, about refusing to surrender, even when surrender was the only rational choice. "We've done what we can," she said quietly. "We need to protect the ranch now." Rowan's hands tightened on the shovel handle. For a moment she thought he might argue. Then his shoulders sagged just slightly, and he nodded. "All right, let's go." They rode back to find the ranch in organized chaos. Frank and Miguel had soaked the roof of the house and barn. had filled every container they could find with water, had moved anything flammable away from the buildings. Jack was with the horses, keeping them calm despite the smoke and the tension crackling through the air. Rowan took in the preparations with a quick glance, then started issuing orders. Frank, you and Miguel take the west side. Jack, stay with the horses. Mara, I'm staying with you, she said. Like hell you are. I'm not arguing about this. Rowan looked at her and she met his gaze without flinching. They stood there for a long moment, locked in silent battle. Finally, he swore under his breath. Fine, but you do exactly what I tell you. No questions, no hesitation. Understood? Understood. The fire hit an hour later. It came like an avalanche of flame, racing across the dry grass with terrifying speed. The sound was deafening, a roar and crackle that drowned out everything else. The heat arrived before the flames, pushing ahead like a physical force, making the air shimmer and distort. Here it comes, Rowan shouted. Everyone to positions. Mara stood beside him on the eastern side of the house, a bucket of water in her hands, a wet cloth tied around her face. She watched the wall of fire approach and felt fear like she'd never known before. This wasn't something you could negotiate with or outthink. This was pure destruction, indifferent and unstoppable. The fire break they'd dug slowed it down, barely. The flames hit the cleared ground and hesitated for a moment, searching for fuel. Then they jumped, carried by wind and embers, and kept coming. Here! Rowan thrust a burlap sack at her. Soak it and beat out any spot fires. Don't let anything catch on the buildings. Mara dunked the sack in water and ran toward a patch of burning grass near the barn. She beat at it frantically, the heat searing her face even through the wet cloth. The flames died, and she moved to the next spot, and the next. Around her, the others were doing the same, a desperate dance of water and beating, trying to control the uncontrollable. Embers fell like hellish snow, each one a potential disaster. The horses screamed in their corral, wild-eyed with terror. Jack, let them loose, Rowan yelled. They'll run to the creek. Jack threw open the gate and the horses bolted, a flood of panicked animals disappearing into the smoke. The fire was everywhere now, surrounding them on three sides. The only clear direction was west, toward the creek where the herd had been moved. Mara's lungs burned, her eyes streaming from the smoke. She could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The barn roof! Miguel's voice cut through the chaos. Mara looked up to see flames licking at the edge of the barn roof, catching on the dry wood despite the water they'd poured on it. We're losing it, Frank shouted. No, we're not. Rowan grabbed a ladder and threw it against the barn wall. Miguel, with me. Mara, keep the ground clear. Rowan, that's insane. But he was already climbing, Miguel right behind him, both men carrying buckets of water. They reached the roof and started dumping water on the flames, beating at them with soaked sacks. Mara's heart was in her throat as she watched them work, silhouetted against the firelit sky. One wrong move, one moment of bad luck, and they'd both fall or be engulfed. A massive crack echoed across the yard. Mara spun to see a dead tree at the edge of the property collapse in a shower of sparks, falling directly toward the house. Watch out! She screamed. The tree crashed into the porch, smashing through the railing and sending burning branches in every direction. Mara ran toward it with her bucket and sack, trying to contain the damage, but there was too much, too fast. Frank appeared beside her, his face blackened with soot. We can't hold this. We need to fall back. No! Mara kept beating at the flames. We can save it. Mrs. Hale, please. I said no. She didn't know where the determination came from, didn't know what made her so certain they could survive this. But she wasn't giving up. Not the house, not the ranch, not after everything they'd fought for. Rowan and Miguel got the barn fire under control just as another section of fence caught, creating a new crisis. They ran from spot to spot, exhausted and desperate, fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. Then, like a miracle they didn't deserve, the wind shifted. It happened suddenly, the hot eastern wind dying and being replaced by a cooler breeze from the west. The fire, which had been driving straight toward them, hesitated. The flames that had been leaping and racing slowed, losing their momentum. It's turning, Miguel shouted. The fire's turning. He was right. The main body of the fire was moving away now, pushed by the new wind back toward the already burned ground where there was nothing left to consume. The immediate threat was passing. But they weren't safe yet. Spot fires still burned across the property, embers still fell from the sky, and the barn roof smoldered dangerously. They worked for another 2 hours, extinguishing every last flame, soaking everything twice over, making absolutely certain nothing would reignite. Finally, when the sun was setting and the air was thick with ash instead of smoke, Rowan called a halt. "That's it," he said, his voice ragged. "We're done." Mara collapsed where she stood, dropping to her knees in the dirt. Her entire body shook with exhaustion and delayed fear. They'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. She looked around at the damage. The eastern fence was gone, burned to nothing. A third of the pasture was blackened and smoking. The porch was destroyed, and there were scorch marks on the house and barn. But the building still stood. The ranch still stood. Rowan sank down beside her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. They just sat there in the ash-covered yard, breathing hard, processing what had just happened. "You should have left when I told you to," Rowan said finally. "Probably. You could have been killed. So could you." He looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. "Thank you." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. Mara felt tears sting her eyes. From smoke, from exhaustion, from the sheer overwhelming relief of being alive. "We did it together," she said. Rowan nodded slowly. Then, surprising them both, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, real. Mara held on tight, and they sat there in the ruins of the day, two people who'd faced down hell and somehow made it through. The others approached slowly, Frank, Miguel, Jack, all of them looking like they'd been through a war, which, in a way, they had. "House is secure," Frank reported. "Barn, too. Lost the east pasture and most of the fencing, but the cattle are safe." The horses?" Rowan asked. "Found most of them at the creek. Couple might have run further, but they'll come back when they're calm." Rowan nodded. "Good work, all of you." Miguel managed a tired grin. "Hell of a day, boss." "Hell of a day," Rowan agreed. They all looked at each other, these people who'd just fought side by side against impossible odds, and something shifted. They weren't just employer and employees anymore, or strangers bound by circumstance. They were something more now, something forged in fire. Frank cleared his throat. "We should get some food, check for injuries, then we all need rest." It was practical advice, and they followed it. Inside the house, miraculously mostly undamaged, they found bread, cheese, dried meat. They ate mechanically, too tired to taste anything, while Jack wrapped burned hands and Miguel treated minor cuts and scrapes. Mara's hands were in terrible shape again, worse than before. Blisters on top of blisters, some burned, all bleeding. Rowan took them gently, cleaning and bandaging with the same careful touch he'd shown before. "You're going to have scars," he said quietly. "So are you." He looked at his own hands, burned, cut, permanently marked by this day. "Yeah, I suppose so." When everyone else had left for their bunks in the barn, the bunkhouse having sustained too much damage to sleep in safely, Mara and Rowan were alone again. They sat at the kitchen table, too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion. "What do we do now?" Mara asked. Rowan was quiet for a moment. "We rebuild, fix the fences, assess the damage, figure out how much grass we lost and whether we can sustain the herd through fall. And if we can't, then we sell some off, take the loss and move forward." He rubbed his face tiredly. "It's not the end. It feels like it right now, but it's not." Mara looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger 2 months ago, who was still a mystery in so many ways. But today, she'd seen him at his core. She'd seen his determination, his courage, his refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier. She'd seen him risk his life for this place, for these people. "Why does this ranch matter so much to you?" she asked. Rowan's expression shuddered slightly, but he didn't deflect this time. "It was Elaine's dream. She's the one who convinced me to buy it, who made it a home instead of just land. When she died, I thought about selling, thought about walking away from everything that reminded me of her. But you didn't." "No. Because leaving would have meant giving up on the only piece of her I had left. This place. It's all I've got." He met her eyes. Or it was. The implication hung between them. Mara's heart beat faster. "You did something incredible today," Rowan continued. "You could have run, should have run. Any sane person would have. But you stayed. You fought for this place like it was yours." "It is mine," Mara said. "Maybe not the way it was Elaine's, but it's mine now too." Rowan studied her face, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Vulnerability, hope, the beginning of something that looked dangerously like trust. "Yeah," he said softly. "I guess it is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Outside, the world was dark and ash-covered, but inside this kitchen, something warm was growing. Something neither of them had planned for or expected. "You should rest," Rowan said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal. So should you." "I will, in a bit." Mara stood, her body protesting every movement. She paused at the doorway, looking back at him. "Rowan? Yeah? We're going to be all right. The ranch, I mean. We'll get through this." He almost smiled. "You sound pretty confident for someone who just watched her new home almost burn down." "Maybe I'm learning from someone stubborn." This time he did smile, a real one that reached his eyes. "Get some sleep, Mara." "You too." Upstairs, Mara collapsed onto her bed fully clothed, too exhausted to even remove her boots. But despite the exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. Her mind kept replaying the day, the fire, the fear, the desperate fight to save everything. And Rowan's hand in hers, solid and real and warm. She touched the ring on her finger, his mother's ring, still too big, still sliding around when she moved. When she'd first put it on, it had felt like a lie, a prop in a performance they were both giving. But now, lying here in the dark with her bandaged hands and ash-stained clothes, it felt different. It felt like it might actually mean something. The next morning came with pale sunlight filtering through smoke-hazed air. Mara dragged herself out of bed and downstairs to find Rowan already up, standing on what remained of the porch, surveying the damage in the harsh light of day. It looked worse than she'd thought. The eastern pasture was a blackened wasteland. The fence was completely gone in some sections, reduced to charred posts. The outbuildings had sustained varying degrees of damage. Even the parts that had survived looked exhausted, sagging under the weight of what they'd endured. "Morning?" Rowan said without turning around. "Morning?" Mara joined him, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool morning air. "Where do we start?" "Frank's already checking the herd for injuries. Miguel's assessing the fence damage. Jack's looking for the missing horses." He paused. "I thought you might want to rest today. And I thought we were past you telling me what to do." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Fair point." "So where do we start?" she asked again. Rowan considered. "The barn roof needs patching before the next rain, and we need to clear the debris from around the house. All those burned branches and fallen wood. It's a fire hazard if it stays." "I can do that." "Mara, your hands are fine. I've got gloves. I'll be careful." He looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "All right, I'll work on the barn. But if it gets to be too much, I'll stop. I promise." He nodded and headed toward the barn, leaving Mara alone with the wreckage. She found a pair of work gloves, different ones, these barely used and far too big for her hands, and started dragging burned wood away from the house. It was hard work, made harder by her injured hands, but she kept at it. She was hauling a particularly stubborn branch when she heard horses approaching. 2 riders crested the rise, and even from a distance, Mara recognized Cole. The woman with him wasn't Sarah this time. It was someone else, older, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent her life working the land. Cole dismounted quickly, taking in the destruction with wide eyes. "Holy hell. We saw the smoke yesterday but couldn't get through. How bad is it?" "Could have been worse," Mara said, dropping the branch. "We saved the main buildings." "Where's Rowan?" "Barn." Cole headed that way while the woman approached Mara, extending a hand. "I'm Margaret Harold, Dutch's wife. I brought some supplies, food, medical things, whatever we could spare." "Thank you, Baron," Mara said, shaking her hand. "That's very kind." Margaret's eyes went to Mara's bandaged hands. "Looks like you were in the thick of it." We all were. I heard you stayed and fought. Most women would have run. Mara bristled slightly at the implication. Most women are stronger than people give them credit for. Margaret's face broke into a smile. I like you. Come on, help me unload these supplies, and you can tell me how you managed to keep my husband's stubborn neighbor from burning down his entire ranch. They worked together, carrying boxes of food and medical supplies into the house. Margaret talked the whole time, a steady stream of information about the other ranches in the area, who'd been affected by the fire, who'd helped who. It was clear she was the social hub of this isolated community, the one who kept track of everyone and everything. Dutch wanted to come help, but he's dealing with his own damage, Margaret said. Fire took out one of his wells. He's fit to be tied about it. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. He's got 3 other wells and twice the land Rowan has. He'll survive. Margaret set down a box and fixed Mara with a shrewd look. How are you really doing? Married to a stranger, living out here in the middle of nowhere, nearly getting killed by a wildfire? That's a lot for anyone. Mara considered how to answer. I'm managing. That's a non-answer if I ever heard one. It's complicated. Marriage usually is. Margaret leaned against the kitchen table. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. Rowan, I mean, he's been lost since Elaine died, buried himself in this ranch and refused to let anyone help. But watching you two fight that fire together, there was something there, a partnership. We made a business arrangement, Mara said carefully. Maybe that's how it started. But I've been married 30 years, girl. I know what partnership looks like, and I saw it yesterday. Margaret straightened, picking up another box. Now come on, show me what other damage needs addressing. I didn't ride all this way just to drop off food and gossip. They spent the next hour walking the property, Margaret offering practical advice on repairs and recovery. She'd been through fires before, knew what could be salvaged and what needed to be replaced. By the time she left, Mara had a much clearer picture of the work ahead, and a growing respect for this tough, practical woman who'd welcomed her without judgment or pity. Cole stayed longer, working alongside Rowan on the barn roof. Mara could hear their voices occasionally, arguing about something, then laughing. It was good to hear Rowan laugh, even if she wasn't part of the conversation. That night, they had their first real meal in days, stew made from the supplies Margaret had brought, with actual vegetables and meat that wasn't jerked or dried. The ranch hands joined them, crowding around the kitchen table, and for the first time it felt less like separate camps and more like a unit. Boss, I was thinking, Miguel said between mouthfuls of stew. That fire break you and Mrs. Hale dug saved us, gave us the time we needed to prepare. Rowan shook his head. Wasn't enough. Fire jumped it easy. But it slowed it down, and that mattered. Miguel looked at Mara. You both did good work out there. Frank nodded agreement. Most women would have... If one more person tells me what most women would have done, Mara interrupted, I'm going to start listing what most men fail to do. There was a beat of silence. Then Jack snorted, trying to hide a laugh. Miguel grinned. Even Frank looked amused. Fair point, Mrs. Hale, Frank said. You proved yourself yesterday. We all saw it. It was, Mara realized, acceptance. These men who'd been skeptical of her from the start were finally seeing her as part of the team. It shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. After dinner, after the hands had returned to the barn and the dishes were washed, Rowan and Mara found themselves alone on what remained of the porch. The stars were out, brilliant in the smoke-cleared sky, and the night was quiet except for the occasional crackle from the still smoldering pasture. Cole thinks I should take out a loan, Rowan said. Rebuild faster, replace the cattle we'll have to sell. What do you think? I think loans are how people lose their land when the next disaster hits. He was quiet for a moment. But I also think I can't do this alone anymore. The ranch, I mean. It's too much for one person. Mara waited, sensing there was more. I've been thinking about what you said, about accepting help. Rowan turned to look at her. Cole's not wrong. I do push too hard, try to control everything, and it's not sustainable. So what are you going to do? I'm going to try something I haven't done in 3 years. I'm going to trust someone. He met her eyes. I'm going to trust you. Mara's breath caught. Rowan, I want you to have a say in how this place runs. Not just the house, but the ranch, the decisions, the planning, all of it. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable with vulnerability. This started as a business arrangement, and maybe that's all it'll ever be. But if we're going to survive out here, we need to be partners. Real partners. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. Mara looked at him, this difficult, closed-off man who was trying, really trying to open up. All right then, partners. She extended her hand, bandages and all. Rowan took it, and they shook, sealing something that felt more important than any legal contract. There's one more thing, Rowan said, not releasing her hand. I need to tell you about Elaine, about what happened. You have a right to know. You don't have to. I do. He took a breath. She was pregnant when she got sick, 5 months along. We'd been trying for years, and when it finally happened, we were so happy. Mara's heart clenched. The fever took her fast, too fast for the doctors to do anything. And the baby. He stopped, swallowed hard. The baby didn't survive either. I lost them both in the same week. I'm so sorry, sir, Mara whispered. I blame myself. Thought if I'd gotten her to town faster, if I'd called the doctor sooner, if I just... something, anything. I couldn't save them, and it broke something in me. He was still holding her hand, gripping it like a lifeline. The ranch became everything after that. If I could keep this place going, if I could make it work, then maybe their lives meant something. Maybe I wasn't completely useless. He looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And then you showed up, offering a deal that made sense only on paper, and I thought I could do it. Keep everything transactional, keep the walls up. But you wouldn't let me. I'm sorry, Mara said. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. You did what I needed someone to do. You pushed back. You stayed when you should have run. You made me see that maybe life doesn't have to be about just surviving. He finally released her hand. I'm not saying this is easy for me, or that I know how to do this, but I want to try, if you're willing. Mara looked at this broken, brave man and felt something shift in her chest. I'm willing. They stood there under the stars, the burned ranch surrounding them, and made a silent promise to each other. Not love. Neither of them was ready for that. But something real. Something worth fighting for. It was a start. The weeks after the fire transformed the ranch in ways Mara hadn't anticipated. The physical rebuilding was hard. Backbreaking work under an unforgiving sun, replacing fence posts, clearing burned pasture, patching roofs and walls. But the harder transformation was the one happening between her and Rowan, a slow dismantling of walls that neither of them quite knew how to navigate. They worked side by side now, truly together. Rowan consulted her on decisions about the herd, about which cattle to sell and which to keep. Mara helped plan the irrigation improvements, using what she'd learned about water flow and conservation. Their conversation stretched beyond simple logistics, venturing into territory that felt dangerously personal. You never talk about Thomas, Rowan said one afternoon. They were mending fence together, the sun beating down on their backs, their hands working in practiced rhythm. Mara hammered a nail before responding. Not much to say. You were married to him for 8 years. I was. Doesn't mean I knew him. She reached for another nail. He was charming when we met. Told me stories about the frontier, about building something from nothing. I was young and stupid enough to believe him. You weren't stupid. I married a drunk who gambled away everything we had. That's pretty stupid. Rowan was quiet for a moment, measuring wire. Love makes people do things that don't make sense. Doesn't make them stupid, just human. Mara looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Did you ever regret it? Marrying Elaine? Not for a second. He stretched the wire tight, securing it to the post. Even knowing how it ended, I'd do it all again. She made me better, made me want to be better. I think that's what love is supposed to do. Yeah, I think so too. The implication hung between them, unspoken but present. What they had now wasn't love, not yet, but it was becoming something. Something that made them both want to try harder, be better, survive longer. That evening, Mara finally worked up the courage to enter the parlor again. She'd been avoiding it since Rowan had caught her with Elaine's journal, respecting his need to keep that space sacred. But they'd talked about partnership, about sharing the burden of this place, and she couldn't do that if she kept treating entire rooms like forbidden territory. Rowan found her there an hour later, dusting the bookshelves, carefully avoiding the corner where the journal still sat. "You're in here," he said from the doorway. "I can leave if—" "No!" He stepped inside, looking around like he was seeing the room for the first time in years. "No, it's fine. It's good, actually. This room shouldn't just sit here collecting dust." Mara set down her cleaning cloth. "I wasn't touching her things, just cleaning around them." Rowan walked to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of the books. These were hers. She loved to read. Used to sit by that window every afternoon with a book and a cup of tea. He smiled slightly at the memory. Drove me crazy sometimes. I'd have 100 things that needed doing, and she'd be curled up reading poetry. She sounds wonderful. She was. He pulled a book from the shelf, a slim volume of Whitman, and opened it. A dried flower fell out, pressed between the pages. She used to mark her favorite passages with whatever she had on hand. Flowers, leaves, sometimes just scraps of paper. He handed the book to Mara. She looked at the marked passage. Elaine's careful annotations in the margin. "You should keep reading them," Rowan said quietly. "The books, I mean. They shouldn't just sit here. She'd want them to be used." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." He replaced the book on the shelf and turned to face her. "I've been holding on to the past so tight I forgot there might be a future worth having. You're helping me remember that." Mara felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to replace her." "You're not. You couldn't if you tried." He took a step closer. "But maybe that's the point. You're not supposed to be her. You're supposed to be you." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Rowan cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the tension. "I should check on the horses. You want to come?" "Yeah, I'd like that." They walked to the barn together as the sun set, painting the scarred landscape in shades of orange and gold. The burned pasture was already showing signs of recovery, small shoots of green pushing through the ash, stubborn life refusing to surrender. It gave Mara hope. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Mara was in the garden, which was finally starting to look like it might actually produce something, when she heard a wagon approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw Gerald Tompkins climbing down from the driver's seat. Her stomach dropped. The banker hadn't been to the ranch since before the wedding. His presence now couldn't mean anything good. "Mrs. Hale," he called out, his oily smile firmly in place. "Lovely to see you looking so industrious." "Mr. Tompkins." Mara set down her trowel and walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is unexpected. Business rarely announces itself in advance." He pulled a leather case from the wagon. "Is your husband here? I need to speak with both of you." Rowan emerged from the barn, his expression immediately hardening when he saw their visitor. "Tompkins." "Mr. Hale. Wonderful. This saves me the trouble of tracking you down separately." The banker's smile widened. "Shall we go inside? This is rather delicate." They settled in the kitchen, Tompkins spreading papers across the table with theatrical precision. Mara and Rowan sat across from him, a united front. "Now then," Tompkins began, pulling out a document. "I've been reviewing your accounts, Mr. Hale, and I'm afraid there are some concerning discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" Rowan's voice was flat, dangerous. "Well, when you assumed Mrs. Hale's debt as part of your marriage arrangement, certain questions arose about the legitimacy of the marriage itself." Mara felt ice settle in her stomach. "What are you talking about?" Tompkins pulled out another document. "A marriage of convenience, entered into solely for financial benefit, can be considered fraudulent under territorial law. And if the marriage is fraudulent, then the debt transfer is invalid, which means Mrs. Hale still owes the bank $1,500. "That's absurd," Rowan said. "We were legally married. You saw the certificate." "Oh, I'm not disputing the legality of the ceremony. I'm questioning the intent." Tompkins leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. "You see, there's been talk in town about the nature of your arrangement, about separate bedrooms and business transactions. People notice things, Mr. Hale. People should mind their own business. Perhaps, but when money is involved, the bank has a duty to investigate. He tapped the papers. Now, if you can prove that this is a genuine marriage, a real partnership, not just a legal fiction, then there's no problem. The debt stays transferred, and we all go about our business. And if we can't prove it to your satisfaction, Mara asked, though she already knew the answer, then I'm afraid the original debt comes due immediately, with interest. And given your current financial situation, Mrs. Hale, I suspect you'd have no choice but to forfeit the land. Tompkins' smile turned sharp, which the bank would then auction to recover its losses. I believe Mr. Harold has already expressed interest in purchasing it. Of course he had. Dutch Harold had been circling Mara's water rights since before Thomas died. This whole thing reeked of his manipulation. You can't do this, Mara said. I'm afraid I can. And I am. Tompkins gathered his papers. You have 30 days to provide evidence of a legitimate marriage, bank statements showing combined finances, witnesses who can attest to your cohabitation as husband and wife, that sort of thing. If you can't produce adequate proof, the debt comes due. He stood, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. I'll see myself out. Do try to have a pleasant day. The sound of the wagon pulling away was the only noise for a long moment. Mara and Rowan sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Dutch is behind this, Rowan said finally. Has to be. He's wanted that water access for years. Can he actually do this? Can Tompkins? If he's got the law on his side, yeah. A fraudulent marriage contract would void the debt transfer. Rowan stood, pacing. We need to prove this is real. But it's not, Mara said quietly. We both know that. We married for practical reasons. Separate rooms, separate lives. That's exactly what Tompkins is saying. It's more than that now. Is it? Really? Mara met his eyes. We're friends, maybe. We work well together, but that's not the same as being married. Rowan stopped pacing. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we need to be honest about what this is. We can't fake our way through a legal challenge. They'll see right through it. So what? We just give up? Let them take your land? I don't know. Mara's voice rose, frustration boiling over. I don't know what we do. This whole thing was supposed to be simple. A business arrangement, but now it's complicated and messy and what? And I don't know how to fix it. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he grabbed his hat and headed for the door. Where are you going? Mara called after him. To talk to Cole. We need legal advice, not guesswork. He left without another word, and Mara sank back into her chair, her head in her hands. How had everything gotten so tangled? 3 months ago, she'd been desperate and alone, accepting a cold arrangement with a stranger. Now she was fighting to keep land she'd started to think of as home, married to a man who was becoming something more than a stranger, but less than a husband, and she had no idea how to untangle any of it. She was still sitting there an hour later when Miguel knocked on the doorframe. Mrs. Hale, you all right? Fine, she lied. Just thinking. Heard Tompkins was here. Nothing good comes from that man. No, it doesn't. Mara straightened, pushing her worry aside. What do you need? Actually came to show you something. Miguel gestured for her to follow. Found it this morning when I was checking the north fence. They walked together to the edge of the property, Miguel leading her to a spot where the fence had burned completely away. There, pushing through the scorched earth, were dozens of tiny green shoots. Wildflowers, Miguel said. Fire brought them out. Seeds were probably lying dormant for years, waiting for the right conditions. Now they're everywhere. Mara knelt down, touching one of the small shoots gently. Life, pushing through destruction, refusing to stay buried. It's a good sign, Miguel continued. Means the land's recovering. Means there's hope. Yeah, Mara said softly. I guess there is. She stayed there for a while after Miguel left, watching the sun move across the sky, thinking about seeds that waited years to grow and marriages that started as lies but might become something true. When she finally walked back to the house, she found Rowan in the kitchen with Cole. We've got options, Cole was saying as she entered. Not great ones, but options. What kind of options? Mara asked. Cole looked up, his expression serious. The law says a fraudulent marriage is one entered into solely for financial gain, with no intent to create a real marital relationship. The key word is intent. If we can show that you intended to build a genuine partnership, even if that intent developed after the initial arrangement, it might be enough. How do we show that? Combined finances, joint ownership of property, witnesses who can testify that you act as husband and wife, not just business partners. Cole pulled out a notebook. The separate bedrooms are a problem. That's going to be hard to explain away. Rowan and Mara exchanged glances. What if we stopped having separate bedrooms? Rowan said quietly. Mara's heart skipped. What? Not like that, he clarified quickly. I mean, what if we made it look like we don't have separate bedrooms? Move some of your things into my room. Make it appear we're sharing space, even if we're not. That's deception, Mara said. So was our marriage initially. We're just catching the appearance up to what we're actually becoming. And what are we becoming? Rowan held her gaze. Partners. Real ones. You said it yourself. We're more than strangers now. Let's prove it. Cole cleared his throat. There's another issue. The town gossip. If people have been talking about your arrangement, Tompkins will use that against you. We need to counter it. Start acting more like a couple in public. Give people something different to talk about. You want us to pretend, Mara said flatly. I want you to be honest about what you're building here, Cole corrected. Stop hiding from each other. Stop pretending you're just business associates. If there's something real developing between you, and I think there is, then show it. The words hung in the air. Mara looked at Rowan, at the man who'd opened up to her about his dead wife, who'd fought beside her through fire, who'd started trusting her with decisions that mattered. Okay, she said. We'll do it. You're sure? Rowan asked. No, but when have we ever been sure about anything? She managed a small smile. We'll figure it out, like we always do. Cole stood, gathering his papers. I'll start working on the legal documentation, combining accounts, transferring property titles to joint ownership. It'll take a few days. In the meantime, you two need to start acting like newlyweds who actually like each other. After Cole left, the reality of what they'd agreed to settled over them. Rowan looked at Mara across the kitchen table, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. We don't have to do this, he said. If it's too much, it's not too much. It's just different. Yeah? They stood there awkwardly, two people who'd learned to work together but had no idea how to be intimate, even in appearance. I should move some things, Mara said finally. Make it look believable. Right, yeah, I'll clear some space in the dresser. It was the strangest afternoon of Mara's life. She carried clothes from her room to his, hanging dresses in the wardrobe beside his shirts, arranging her few belongings on the dresser he'd hastily cleared. Rowan hovered awkwardly, trying to help, but mostly just getting in the way. This is ridiculous, Mara said, laughing despite herself as they nearly collided for the third time. Completely ridiculous, Rowan agreed. But he was smiling too, and some of the tension eased. By evening, the room looked like it belonged to both of them. Mara's book sat beside his on the nightstand. Her brush and mirror shared the dresser with his shaving kit. It was strange and intimate and terrifying. Where are you actually sleeping? Mara asked. There's a cot in the office downstairs. I'll use that. Rowan, it's fine. Better if we're not actually sharing the space. Less complicated. He was right, but it still felt wrong somehow, like they were admitting defeat before they even tried. That night, lying alone in her own room one last time, Mara stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell she was doing. This had started as survival, a desperate woman and a desperate man making a calculated choice. When had it become something more? When had she started caring what happened to this ranch, to these people, to him? She didn't have answers. She wasn't sure she wanted them. The next Sunday, they attended church together for the first time. Mara dressed carefully in her best dress, still worn but clean, and Rowan wore his suit, the same one he'd married her in. They rode into town in the wagon, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. The church was packed. Every head turned when they walked in, whispers rippling through the congregation. Mara held her head high, her hand tucked in the crook of Rowan's elbow, refusing to show weakness. They sat in the third pew, and Mara was acutely aware of every eye on them, every whisper behind gloved hands. Gerald Tompkins sat across the aisle, his expression smug. Dutch Harold was 2 rows back, watching with undisguised interest. The service was interminable. Reverend Michaels droned on about duty and righteousness, and Mara struggled to focus on anything except the weight of Rowan's arm against hers, the warmth of him beside her. Afterward, they lingered on the church steps, forcing themselves to socialize. Margaret Harold approached first, bless her, pulling Mara into conversation about the garden while Rowan talked with some of the other ranchers. "I heard about Tompkins's visit," Margaret said quietly. "Word travels fast out here." "I'm sure it does. For what it's worth, I think the whole thing is nonsense. You two are clearly making a go of it. Anyone with eyes can see that." Mara managed a grateful smile. "Thank you." "Of course my husband disagrees. He's convinced you're playing some kind of game." Margaret's expression hardened. "Don't underestimate Dutch. He wants that water access, and he's got Tompkins in his pocket." "We know." "Then be careful. And if you need someone to testify on your behalf, you let me know. I'll tell that banker exactly what I think of his investigation." It was the first real support Mara had received from anyone in town, and it meant more than she could express. "Thank you, Margaret." The older woman squeezed her hand. "We women have to stick together. The men sure as hell won't do it for us." Rowan appeared at Mara's elbow, and Margaret excused herself with a knowing smile. They walked back to the wagon together, maintaining the careful closeness they'd practiced. "That went better than I expected," Rowan said once they were away from prying ears. "Margaret's on our side. That helps." Dutch was watching us like a hawk. "Let him watch. We've got nothing to hide." Mara paused. "Well, we do, but he doesn't know that." Rowan helped her into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. Playing the part, Mara told herself. Just playing the part. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they pulled into the yard, Miguel came running, his face urgent. "Boss, we got a problem. One of the cows is down by the creek, and she's in bad shape. Looks like she got into some kind of poison plant." Rowan was moving before Miguel finished speaking, jumping down from his wagon and heading for the barn. Mara followed, gathering her skirts and running to keep up. The cow was in rough shape, lying on her side and struggling to breathe. Rowan knelt beside her, examining her with practiced hands. "Larkspur," he said grimly. "Must have been growing by the creek. Damn it!" "Can we save her?" Mara asked. "Maybe, if we can get her stomach emptied and keep her calm." He looked up at Miguel. "Get Frank. We're going to need help moving her to the barn." They worked for hours, trying everything they could think of. Rowan forced water down the cow's throat, trying to dilute the poison. Mara stayed by her head, speaking in soothing tones, keeping her as calm as possible. But by evening, it was clear they were losing the battle. "It's not working," Rowan said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The poison's too far into her system. There has to be something else we can try." "There isn't." He sat back on his heels, defeat written across his face. "She's gone." They sat there in the barn as the cow took her last labored breath, and Mara felt tears sting her eyes. It was just one cow, one loss among many they'd sustained. But it felt like more than that. It felt like proof that no matter how hard they fought, the land could still take everything. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Rowan shook his head. "Not your fault. It's this place. It takes and takes, and sometimes I wonder why I keep fighting for it." "Because it's yours. Because it matters." "Does it? I lost Elaine, lost our baby, nearly lost the whole ranch to fire. Now this." He looked at the dead cow with hollow eyes. "Maybe Cole's right. Maybe I should just sell it all and walk away." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" He stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "I'm tired, Mara. Tired of fighting a losing battle." He walked out of the barn, leaving Mara alone with the dead animal and her own racing thoughts. She'd never seen him like this, truly defeated, ready to surrender. It scared her more than Tompkins' threats or Dutch's scheming. She found him an hour later on what remained of the porch, a bottle of whiskey beside him. He'd already had several drinks, judging by the level of the bottle. Rowan, don't. Whatever you're going to say, just don't. Mara sat down beside him anyway. You're allowed to be tired. Am I? Because it feels like if I stop even for a second, everything falls apart. So let it fall apart, just for tonight. Tomorrow we'll put it back together. He laughed bitterly. You don't give up, do you? Neither do you, not really. She took the bottle from him, taking a small sip herself. The whiskey burned going down. We've survived this much. We'll survive the rest. You sound pretty confident for someone whose entire future hangs on convincing a banker that our fake marriage is real. It's not fake anymore, Mara said quietly. Rowan turned to look at her. What? Our marriage. It started fake, but it's not anymore. We're partners. We care about this place, about each other. She met his eyes. That's real, Rowan. Maybe it's not what either of us planned, but it's real. He stared at her, and in the fading light, she saw something shift in his expression. When did that happen? I don't know, gradually, then all at once. She smiled slightly. That's how most important things happen, I think. Rowan reached out, his hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone and Mara's breath caught. If we do this, he said softly, if we make this real, really real, there's no going back. You understand that? I understand. I'm not easy to live with. I'm stubborn and closed off, and I carry more grief than any one person should. I'm not easy either. I'm difficult and opinionated, and I don't know when to quit. Yeah, I noticed. He smiled slightly. We're a mess. A magnificent mess. He leaned forward, and Mara closed her eyes, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative and real, and nothing like the cold arrangement they'd started with. It was brief, just a moment, but it felt like a promise. When they pulled apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, the relationship part. It's been so long, and I'm so out of practice, and then we'll figure it out together, like everything else. Together, he repeated. I like the sound of that. They sat there as night fell completely, the stars coming out one by one above them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The burned pasture smoldered faintly. The dead cow needed burying. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new crises. But tonight, for the first time since this unlikely partnership began, they sat together as something more than strangers playing a part. They sat as two broken people who'd found in each other something worth fighting for. And somehow, that felt like victory. The morning after their kiss, Mara woke in her own room, still maintaining the pretense of separation, even as everything between them had shifted. She lay there for a moment, fingers touching her lips, replaying the previous night. The vulnerability in Rowan's eyes, the way his hand had trembled slightly when he touched her face. The kiss that had felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. She heard him moving around downstairs, the familiar sounds of morning routine. For a moment, she let herself imagine a different kind of morning, waking beside him, starting the day together in truth instead of performance. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. When she came down to the kitchen, Rowan was at the stove, attempting to make coffee. He turned when he heard her, and their eyes met. The air between them felt charged, different. Morning, he said, his voice slightly rough. Morning. They stood there awkwardly, two people who'd crossed a line and didn't quite know how to navigate the aftermath. About last night, Rowan started. I don't regret it, Mara cut him off. If that's what you're worried about. His shoulders relaxed slightly. I don't either, but I don't want you to think I'm pushing for something you're not ready for. I know, and I appreciate that. She moved closer, taking the coffee pot from him before he could burn it. But Rowan, we need to talk about what happens next. With Tompkins, with the hearing, we're running out of time. Cole's filing the paperwork today. Joint accounts, property transfer, all of it. He thinks if we can show 6 months of legitimate partnership, the case falls apart. 6 months is a long time to pretend. Who says we'd be pretending? Mara looked at him, at the hope and fear warring in his expression. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying maybe we stop thinking of this as temporary. Maybe we actually try to build something real. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inability to articulate what he meant. I'm not good at this. The words part. But last night, when I kissed you, that wasn't for show. That wasn't strategy. That was me wanting to kiss you because I've been thinking about it for weeks and finally stopped being too much of a coward to do it. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. Weeks? Since the fire. Maybe before. He stepped closer. You're not what I expected, Mara. You were supposed to be a solution to a problem. Instead, you became more. And I don't know what to do with that except be honest about it. She reached up, touching his face the way he'd touched hers the night before. Then let's be honest. I'm terrified. Of this, of us, of what it means if we actually try and fail. But I'm more terrified of not trying at all. So we try? We try. He kissed her again, different from the night before. Less tentative, more certain. Mara leaned into him, letting herself feel what she'd been denying for weeks. Want, need, the beginning of something that might become love, if they were brave enough to let it. The kiss was interrupted by a knock at the door, sharp, insistent. They pulled apart, and Mara saw frustration flash across Rowan's face. I'll get it, he muttered. It was Cole, looking disheveled and urgent. We've got problems. What kind of problems? Rowan asked, stepping aside to let his brother in. Cole dropped a newspaper on the kitchen table. This kind. The headline read, Local Rancher's Marriage of Convenience Under Investigation. The article beneath it detailed their arrangement with gleeful speculation, quoting unnamed sources about separate bedrooms and business transactions. It painted them as schemers trying to defraud the bank. Dutch, Rowan said flatly. Almost certainly. Or Tompkins. Maybe both. Cole ran a hand through his hair. This changes things. Now, it's not just a quiet investigation, it's public. The territorial judge is going to have to take this seriously. What does that mean for us? Mara asked. It means we need to be prepared for a formal hearing. You'll both have to testify, and they're going to ask invasive questions about your relationship. Very invasive. Mara felt her stomach drop. How invasive? Whether you share a bed, how often? Details about your daily life together. They're going to try to prove you're not actually married in any meaningful sense. But we are, Rowan said. We work together. We make decisions together. You also have separate bedrooms and entered into this marriage for explicit financial benefit, Cole interrupted. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying they have ammunition. Rowan slammed his hand on the table, making them both jump. This is bullshit. What Mara and I do or don't do in our private life is nobody's business. I agree. But territorial law says otherwise. Cole looked between them. Unless you can prove that you're cohabiting as husband and wife, and I mean actually prove it, not just claim it, you're going to lose. The implication settled over them like a weight. Mara met Rowan's eyes across the table, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there. When's the hearing? Rowan asked. 2 weeks. Monday the 18th. That's not enough time. It's what we've got. Cole gathered up his papers. I'll do everything I can from the legal side, but you two need to make a decision about how far you're willing to go to make this look real. After Cole left, Mara and Rowan sat in heavy silence. The coffee had gone cold, the morning light harsh through the kitchen window. They want proof we're sleeping together, Mara said finally. Yeah. We could lie. They'll know. They'll ask questions we won't be able to answer convincingly. Rowan looked at her. I won't force you into anything you don't want. If we have to lose this fight, we lose it. And if I want to fight, then we fight. But you need to understand what that means. Mara did understand. It meant crossing the final line between pretense and reality. It meant sharing not just a room but a bed, not just a name but intimacy. It meant risking everything, her heart, her safety, her carefully maintained walls, on a man she'd known for 3 months. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. She spent the day in the garden, digging and planting with furious energy, trying to work out her tangled thoughts through physical labor. The garden was thriving now despite the poor soil, proving that stubborn determination could overcome terrible odds. Maybe she could too. Margaret Harold appeared around midday, picking her way through the rows of vegetables. "Heard about the newspaper article," she said without preamble. "Whole town's buzzing. I bet they are. For what it's worth, I told Dutch he was a fool for going along with Tompkins' scheme. Not that he listened." Margaret knelt beside Mara, pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You're going to anyway." "True." Margaret smiled slightly. "Do you love him? Rowan, I mean." Mara's hand stilled in the dirt. "I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated." "Love usually is." Margaret sat back on her heels. "I married Dutch when I was 18. Didn't love him, not at first. It was an arrangement between our families. But somewhere along the way, between the fights and the hard times and the small moments of kindness, I fell for him. Took me 5 years to realize it, but once I did, everything made sense. What if it doesn't work out? What if we try and fail? Then you fail. But at least you tried." Margaret looked at her seriously. "You can spend your whole life protecting yourself from hurt, Mara. But protection comes at a cost. Sometimes the only way to truly live is to risk breaking." After Margaret left, Mara sat in the garden watching the sun move across the sky, turning those words over in her mind. Risk-breaking. She'd spent 8 years with Thomas watching him break piece by piece, powerless to stop it. She'd protected herself by shutting down, by expecting nothing, by treating her heart like something fragile that needed constant guarding. But maybe that was the wrong approach. Maybe the heart was meant to be used, not preserved. Maybe breaking was part of living. She found Rowan in the barn, repairing tack. He looked up when she entered, setting down his work. "I've been thinking," Mara said. "That sounds dangerous." "I'm serious." She moved closer. "This hearing, whatever they ask, however invasive it gets, I want to fight it. I want to prove they're wrong. Mara, I'm not done. I want to fight because this place matters to me, because what we're building here matters. But mostly because you matter." She took a breath. "I don't know if what I feel is love yet, but it could be, if we let it. And I think that's worth fighting for." Rowan stood slowly, closing the distance between them. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm sure I want to try." He kissed her then, deep and real, and Mara felt something unlock inside her chest. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We should probably practice," Rowan said, his voice rough. "Practice?" "Being convincing, together." He gestured awkwardly. "I mean, if they're going to ask questions about our relationship, we should probably have a relationship to answer about." Mara laughed despite herself. "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard." "I'm out of practice. Cut me some slack." "How about this? Tonight we have dinner together. Not working dinner, not planning dinner. An actual meal where we talk like people who are trying to get to know each other." "I can do that." That evening, Mara cooked a real meal. Nothing fancy, but more than the usual thrown-together sustenance. She set the table properly, using the good dishes that had been gathering dust in the cabinet. When Rowan came in from his work, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. "This is nice," he said. "It's an experiment." They sat across from each other, and for the first time since they'd married, they talked. Really talked. Not about the ranch or the drought or the legal threats, but about themselves. Rowan told her about growing up with Cole, about their parents who died in a winter storm when he was 19. Mara talked about her childhood, about her strict father and disappointed mother, about the dreams she'd had before Thomas crushed them. "Did you want children?" Rowan asked quietly. "Once, when I was young and stupid and thought Thomas would be different than he was." Mara traced the rim of her glass. "What about you?" Pain flickered across his face. "We were trying. Before Elaine got sick, she wanted a house full of kids. Used to talk about it all the time, planning names and nurseries and what they'd be like." He was quiet for a moment. "After she died, I couldn't imagine it. The thought of trying again, of risking that kind of loss, it seemed impossible." And now? He met her eyes. Now I think maybe impossible things happen anyway, whether we plan for them or not. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, favorite books, childhood mishaps, absurd ranch stories. Mara laughed harder than she had in years, and Rowan's smile came easier, more natural. When dinner ended, neither of them wanted the evening to end. "Walk with me?" Rowan asked. They walked out into the twilight, across the recovering pasture where new grass pushed through ash. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. "I think I'm falling for you," Rowan said suddenly. "I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe when you faced down that fire without blinking. Maybe when you stood up to me about the garden. Maybe the first day when you walked into that saloon and demanded respect." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "But it's happening, and I thought you should know." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "I think I'm falling for you too, and it terrifies me." "Good. We can be terrified together." He pulled her close, and they stood there under the emerging stars, two broken people choosing to risk breaking again for the chance at something whole. That night, for the first time, Mara slept in Rowan's room. Not in his bed, not yet, but in the same space separated by darkness and uncertainty, but together nonetheless. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and growing intimacy. Cole drilled them on potential questions, making them practice their answers until they sounded natural. They combined their finances officially, opening a joint account and transferring property deeds. They made a point of being seen together in town, at the general store and the post office, acting like newlyweds who'd chosen each other instead of strangers bound by necessity. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Rowan discovered that Mara hummed while she worked in the garden. Mara learned that Rowan had nightmares sometimes, waking in the dark with Elaine's name on his lips. They navigated these discoveries with patience and grace, building trust one small moment at a time. 3 days before the hearing, they finally shared a bed. It was awkward and sweet, and nothing like either of them had imagined. They lay there afterward, tangled together in the darkness, and Mara felt something settle into place inside her. "I love you," she said quietly. Rowan's arms tightened around her. "I love you too." The hearing was held in the territorial courthouse, a stern building that smelled of old wood and judgment. Mara wore her best dress, Rowan his suit, and they sat together at a scarred wooden table facing Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. Gerald Tompkins presented his case with oily confidence, calling witnesses who testified about the business nature of the marriage, about separate bedrooms and financial transactions. Dutch Harold took the stand, claiming he'd heard Rowan himself call the marriage a practical arrangement. "Mr. Harold," Judge Morrison interrupted, "are you in the habit of eavesdropping on private conversations?" Dutch flushed. "I'm simply reporting what I heard." "From where and when?" It was at the saloon before they married. He said it was about water rights." "Before they married. So you're testifying about conversations that happened prior to the actual relationship developing." The judge made a note. Noted. "Anything else?" Dutch's testimony fell apart under questioning, revealing his own financial interest in the outcome. By the time he stepped down, he looked more like the schemer than Rowan and Mara did. Then it was their turn. Cole called character witnesses first. Margaret Harold, who testified eloquently about the partnership she'd observed. Miguel, who talked about seeing them work side by side through the fire. Frank, gruff and uncomfortable, who nonetheless stated plainly that they were the most married couple he'd ever seen. Finally, Cole called Rowan to the stand. "Mr. Hale, can you describe the nature of your relationship with your wife?" Rowan looked at Mara, and she saw love in his eyes. Real, undeniable love. "She's my partner, in every sense of the word. We work together, we plan together, we've built something together that's more than either of us could have built alone." "Were you in love when you married her?" "No," Rowan said honestly. "I married her because I needed water rights and she needed financial security. That's the truth." A murmur went through the courtroom. Tompkins smiled. "But," Rowan continued, "somewhere between that desperate arrangement and today, I fell in love with her. With her strength and her stubbornness and the way she refuses to quit, even when quitting would be easier. She made me remember what it means to live instead of just survive. So no, I didn't love her when we married, but I love her now, completely. Mara felt tears streaming down her face. Your witness, Cole said to Tompkins. The banker stood, adjusting his vest. Mr. Hale, you testified that you didn't love your wife when you married her. Isn't it convenient that you claim to love her now, when your financial interests are at stake? There's nothing convenient about it. Loving someone is terrifying and difficult, and it means risking everything. I avoided it for 3 years after my first wife died because I was too much of a coward to try again. If this was about convenience, I'd have stayed alone. But you do benefit financially from this marriage being deemed legitimate. So does she. So does the bank when I pay off her debt. So does every person who's helped us rebuild after the fire. Everyone benefits when people work together and take care of each other. That's how communities survive. Tompkins tried several more angles, but Rowan held firm, his testimony unwavering. Then they called Mara. She took the stand with shaking hands, swore to tell the truth, and faced down the room full of people judging her choices. Mrs. Hale, Cole began gently, can you tell us why you proposed this marriage to Mr. Hale? Because I was desperate. I was drowning in debt. The whole town had written me off, and I saw one chance to survive, so I took it. And do you regret it? Not for a second. Mara looked at Rowan. I thought I was trading one prison for another, Thomas's debts for someone else's expectations. But Rowan never treated me like property or a servant or anything less than an equal. He gave me respect when no one else would. He trusted me when I had no reason to be trusted. And somewhere in all that, I fell in love with him. When did you know? Cole asked. The night of the fire. When he was on that barn roof and I thought he might fall, I realized I couldn't imagine this life without him in it. Not the ranch, not the security. Him. The man who works himself to exhaustion because he cares too much. The man who's carrying grief that would break most people but still shows up every day and tries. That's when I knew. Tompkins took his turn, trying to trip her up with questions about their sleeping arrangements, about when they'd first become intimate, about the practical details of their daily life. Mara answered honestly, refusing to be ashamed. Isn't it true that you maintained separate bedrooms for the first 2 months of your marriage? Yes. Because this wasn't a real marriage. Because we were strangers trying to figure out how to trust each other. Mara leaned forward. Mr. Tompkins, you've been married how long? He blinked, caught off guard. 23 years. Did you love your wife the day you married her? That's not relevant. It's completely relevant. Did you know everything about her? Trust her completely? Or did that come later, after time and effort, and choosing each other every day? Judge Morrison's lips twitched. Answer the question, Mr. Tompkins. It developed over time, he admitted grudgingly. Exactly. So why are you holding us to a different standard? Why does our marriage have to be perfect from day one to be considered real? There was no good answer to that, and Tompkins knew it. The judge called a recess to review the testimony. Mara and Rowan waited in the hallway, hands clasped, neither of them able to speak. They'd laid everything bare in that courtroom, their fears, their failures, their growing love. Now they had to wait and see if it was enough. An hour later, they were called back in. Judge Morrison looked at them over her spectacles. I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented today. This is an unusual case. There's no question that this marriage began as a practical arrangement entered into for financial benefit. However, the law doesn't require marriages to begin with love, only that they represent a genuine intent to create a marital partnership. Mara held her breath. Mara, based on the testimony I've heard today from both the respondents and the witnesses, I'm satisfied that Mr. and Mrs. Hale have created exactly that, a genuine partnership. The fact that it started from practical necessity doesn't negate what it's become. She looked at Tompkins. The debt transfer stands. The marriage is legitimate. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a decisive crack. Mara sagged against Rowan, relief flooding through her. They'd won. Against the odds. Against the scheming. Against everyone who'd bet on them failing. They'd won. Outside the courthouse, Cole pulled them both into a crushing hug. You did it. I can't believe it. but you actually did it. We told the truth, Rowan said. That's all. Sometimes that's enough. Cole grinned. Now get out of here. Go celebrate. They rode home in the wagon, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Mara kept looking at Rowan, at the man who'd become her husband in truth, not just on paper. What are you thinking? He asked. That we should probably figure out what comes next. I thought what comes next is we keep doing what we've been doing. Work the ranch, build our life, see where it goes. Just like that? Just like that. He reached over, taking her hand. Unless you had other plans. Mara thought about it. The ranch still faced challenges, the drought, the damaged pasture, the constant struggle against harsh land. They'd still fight and disagree and have hard days, but they'd face it together now, truly together. No other plans, she said. This is exactly where I want to be. When they reached the ranch, the hands were waiting, Miguel, Frank, and Jack all grinning. We heard, Miguel called out. Congratulations, boss. Mrs. Hale. How did you hear already? Mara asked. Margaret Harold rode out to tell us. Said you two put on quite a show in that courtroom. Frank stepped forward, awkward but sincere. We're glad you're staying, both of you. It was acceptance, real and complete. Mara felt tears prick her eyes for the 100th time that day. That evening, after the celebrating and the congratulations and the endless retelling of the hearing, Mara and Rowan finally found themselves alone. They stood in the bedroom that was truly theirs now. No more pretense, no more performance. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, Mara said. If it is, I'm having the same one. Rowan pulled her close. We did something crazy, you know. Built something real out of something fake. I'm not sure that's supposed to work. Maybe it works because we stopped trying to force it and just let it happen. Maybe. He kissed her forehead. I love you, Mara Hale. I just thought you should hear it again. I love you too, even though you're stubborn and terrible at expressing emotions and you work too hard. And you're difficult and opinionated and you never know when to quit. We're quite a pair. Yeah, we really are. They stood there in the quiet of their room, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow made it work. Outside, the ranch waited, damaged but recovering, challenging but theirs. There would be hard days ahead. The drought might continue. The creek might fail. The land might take more than it gave, but they'd face it together, partners, equals, two broken people who'd chosen to build something whole. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the perfect beginning or the guaranteed ending, but the choice to keep trying, keep fighting, keep loving even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Because survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about finding reasons to endure. And they'd found their reason in each other. 3 months later, Mara stood in the garden she'd carved from nothing, watching the vegetables grow in neat rows. The drought had broken the week after the hearing, blessed rain finally coming to the parched land. The creek ran strong again, the pasture was recovering, and new calves dotted the fields. Rowan appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. Good harvest coming. Better than I expected. You have a gift for making things grow in impossible conditions. I learned from the best. She leaned into him. This place tried so hard to break us. But it didn't. No, it didn't. She turned to face him. I have something to tell you. Something in her tone made him alert. What is it? I'm pregnant. Rowan went very still. You're sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But Rowan, if this is too much, if it brings back too many memories of Elaine... Stop. He cupped her face in his hands. This isn't the same. You're not her. This isn't then. And I'm not that man anymore. I'm terrified, yes, but I'm also happy. We're going to have a baby. Mara saw tears in his eyes and felt her own fall. We're going to have a baby. He kissed her then, deep and real, and when they pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. I love you, he said. You and this baby, and this impossible life we've built. I love you too. They stood there in the garden as the sun set. Two people who'd learned that the best things in life rarely come easy, that love built on honesty and partnership and choosing each other every day was stronger than love that bloomed perfect and untested. That survival meant more than just enduring. It meant finding beauty in the struggle, hope in the hardship, and connection in the midst of isolation. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but it had given them something precious, not despite the difficulties, but because of them. They'd been forged in fire, tested by drought, challenged by loss. And they'd come through it stronger, better, more whole than either of them had been alone. That was the truth about second chances. They didn't come gift-wrapped and perfect. They came disguised as desperate arrangements and practical decisions. They came covered in ash and blood and hard-earned scars. But if you were brave enough to take them, brave enough to do the work, brave enough to risk breaking, they could become something extraordinary. Standing there in their recovered garden, with their future growing inside her, Mara finally understood what she'd been searching for all those years. Not perfection, not safety, not even happiness in the simple sense. She'd been searching for this. For partnership. For purpose. For a love that was real because it had been tested and survived. For a home that was home because they'd built it together, piece by piece, choice by choice. And she'd found it in the last place she'd expected, in a cold arrangement with a grieving stranger, in a burned ranch on the edge of nowhere, in the arms of a man who'd learned to love again because she'd been stubborn enough to stay. The ranch would always be difficult. The land would always demand more than seemed possible. There would be droughts and fires and losses still to come, but they'd face them together. These two people who had learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst beginnings. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.